Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson. Here with me, as always, is Brian Gottlieb, and we have been busy, my friends.
So busy. Why are there so many things happening in Magic right now? I feel like I haven't had a free moment, and I don't even know how long. It's just been nonstop news and new formats, and I've been traveling. I went to SCG Atlanta this past weekend, and then there's the MC coming up in Richmond, and then the Invitationals the week after that, and the formats are changing, and I just need a rest, Jerry. I need a nap.
Well, that's too bad because we have a podcast to do. We have two formats to talk about, and we have to get back on the YouTube train.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I guess more work then. I'll just never sleep again. That's fine.
Yeah. So MC Richmond, is it an MC? I guess I don't know what they're calling it these days.
I think it's still an MC. The next set become the Players Tours. So this is
okay.
This is still a Mythic Championship.
Got it. So this is my last invite until I manage to spike a qualifier. This is the last of my Team Series invites. So I'm going to go participate in that, play in Oko Fest 2K19. It's going to be great. And then the week after that, we have SCG Con. You're going to be doing commentary. I'm going to be playing some Modern and Standard. Wait, scratch that. Modern and Pioneer. I'm so excited.
Me too. Look, I never dread doing an SCG event because we have a good time no matter what. And we would have joked about it and made it an interesting broadcast regardless of the format we were presented with. But man, does this make our job so much easier. I will say that the folks who feel a little slighted because they had been prepping for Standard this whole time, I get it. I'm sympathetic. I know that's a tough situation, but the vast majority of players super excited by this change, and the viewers are going to be infinitely excited. Like if you're not actively participating in this tournament, this is such a huge win for you, and it feels like it has really amped up the excitement surrounding the SCG Invitational, where we're starting to kind of peter off a little bit because people are just off the Standard. They're not excited about it. That being said, we're going to talk about it for a while because like you said, you have an MC coming up. A lot of our listeners have an MC coming up. I have a GP coming up because I will also be going to Richmond. And my plan right now is to probably play the GP for a few reasons. One of them being, I think this is a setup that really benefits you in particular. And I think you're going to now extend that to our listeners and extend that to me, and it can create a really good situation for folks who are willing to do the homework and what's quite frankly not going to be the most fun format ever, but a format that maybe is exploitable.
Team or Wreck, the end. We'll get into that in a little bit. First, I want to backtrack to the being sympathetic comments as far as like the formats changing.
Sure.
I looked at the Twitter thread for SCG's announcement, and it is very last minute notice to change the format away from Standard and to Pioneer. For those attending SCG Con, in case you haven't seen it, look that up because it's relevant to you. But for people who need Pioneer cards or are looking for some Pioneer cards, I would like to extend a potential courtesy where if you need something, let me know before I leave on this next Wednesday. I will do my best to try and bring it for you. I have a lot of extra commons, uncommons. I have some things like, 20 Aetherworks Marvels and 20 Smugglers Copters that I inherited from Michael Majors. And, I'm bringing basically all of my Pioneer cards with me, and I'm only going to be playing one deck. So I want to do my best to actually try and help those who this decision actually affects.
Yeah, and I can do the same thing. I don't know that I have the same depth of cards lying around that you do.
I still have a lot of holes too in my collection, so don't make it look like I have like every single deck covered or whatever, but I will do my best.
Yeah, same. I want to help out. I want to make this work. And I think it's important that if you are someone who enjoyed this change, if you are someone who benefited from this change, if you are someone who wants changes like this to happen going forward, I think it's really important you help out your fellow players here and make sure people aren't negatively impacted by a lack of card availability. And I will tell you, this was a very scary decision for SCG. I don't have inside knowledge of this. I was not involved in this decision process whatsoever. I just show up and say the words.
Yeah, same.
But I know that they did not take this lightly. They take their player engagement very seriously. They are cognizant of what changes like this mean. And the fact that they did this is a risk for them. I mean, they're putting themselves out there, but they are just trying to deliver the best product possible. I saw some folks saying it felt like a cash grab. This isn't to be like dismissive of that, but a few hundred people showing up at an event and buying cards, SCG is much bigger than that. That's like a drop in the hat. They didn't do this to exploit people showing up at the tournament. I'm sure of that. So they did it because they wanted it to be an exciting tournament.
Yeah, and people are going to buy their Pioneer cards eventually. You know, It's not like they're in some big rush, like they have to offload all their stuff. No, that's not the case. And if you look at the tournament attendance for Standard, it is way down for them.
Yeah, our opens have been horrible. There were like 56 people playing the open this past weekend.
The classics, yeah.
The classics, I'm sorry, yeah, the Standard classics. Even at the launch of the format, the Field of the Dead format, the Standard numbers were really bad.
Right, and I don't anticipate that getting any better based on the fact that, WotC announced that they are not going to make any emergency changes, but they are definitely going to be looking at the ban list after the MC. That's another sort of like ominous feeling thing where it's like, well, if they feel that there is enough, chatter going on that they have to address it, it means that they are aware of it for sure.
Yes. How could you not be? I mean, it's all anyone talks about. And I'm not saying that to dismiss people's concerns. And look, we've been dismissive of people's concerns in the past, right? If you remember during the first ban Faithless Looting discussion, during the rise of Is It Phoenix, you and I were very staunchly trying to pump the brakes on that. But part of the reasons we were trying to stop that is because it kind of overshadows situations where there are legitimate concerns. There's legitimate concerns right now. Standard's messed up, straight up.
Yes. However, I have the, I guess, interesting viewpoint, unique viewpoint of, like you kind of mentioned, this is a format that's sort of good for me, where you have a very clear public enemy, right? It is Oko, mostly all forms, shapes, and sizes, but specifically, I think Sultai is the one that should be the thing that you look at hard targeting because of the numbers. It is very popular, it wins a lot, and it has things like 4 main deck Noxious Grasps to account for the fact that the mirror is very popular. So these are things that are all very easily exploitable. Like, you want to get an edge. I mean, this is basically the perfect time that you could try and do that, because you can play things like Knights or Blue-White Control or Is It or Temur Reclamation. And these decks all have reasonable Simic matchups or Sultai matchups, and they don't get hit by Noxious Grasp.
Yeah, and that seems like a very good starting place to me. I'll tell you my first instinct as far as that goes. These decks you mentioned, Temur Reclamation, Blue-White Control, I agree that Noxious Grasp's not great against these decks. You know what card is, though? It's Veil of Summer. And now, as a response to Noxious Grasp, Veil of Summer starts to creep into the main deck.
I think that's overblown, man. Like, so this was Croaky's thing, right?
He was the first I saw to really go into Noxious Grasp really hard. And I do think he had some number of main deck Veil of Summer. Yeah. But those exist. I mean, I'm seeing it on Arena, and I don't know if it's something that is still propagating or if it's really just an integral part of the format right now. But that's a reasonable response to me. Like, this is a powerful, powerful Magic card. And when things are this far inbred, you got to consider at least main decking Veil of Summer.
Anyway, Croaky's Twitch streamer, very frequent contributor to Arena Decklist, the Twitter account, always playing in very high Mythic, always doing well, usually has innovative stuff. Definitely check him out. He was also, as far as I know, like one of the first people like doing the Sultai thing. And people very quickly latched onto what he was doing for the Arena PTQ last weekend, and Sultai did very, very well. They all had like the 4 main deck Noxious Grasp. They had Vraska Golgari Queen in the main deck, Massacre Girl in the 75 somewhere to beat up on Selesny Adventures. Like, the list that he put out was the thing that ended up being the de facto thing. And most recently, he posted a list that was also like, well, at this point, I'm just main decking Veil of Summer. And I don't know that that's the correct answer, because a few people even replied to his tweet with like, I don't even board in Veil in the mirror, because it doesn't affect that many things. Like if you see a bunch of counter spells, Agent of Treacheries, mass manipulations, then sure, but just for Noxious Grasps, it's not worth it.
Does there reach a point where it becomes worth it? I mean, it's got to be getting close when like previously there were not a bunch of removal spells going around. And the more important thing is that, like I said, if there are responses to this deck, it does seem like they are the ones that are actually super vulnerable to the Veil of Summer. So it's an okay card in the mirror. And then these decks that you're mentioning that can really maybe hard target something like Simic based Oko decks, you get your edge back in those by getting a bunch of Veil of Summer.
Right. So, I mean, if you want to circle all the way back to I think the first deck I mentioned, which is Knights, if you play Rakdos Knights, they don't care about Veil or Noxious Grasp.
Sure.
Because they're just a pile of creatures and Embercleaves, basically. And I think that is a perfectly reasonable way to try and attack Simic to begin with, especially if they're cutting a lot of their low-end stuff and starting to play things like Vraska and even just like more interaction to try and get a leg up in mirror matches. It leads them to just being super vulnerable to anything that plays like triple 1-drop against them.
There's not a lot of evidence, though, that actually paints that as a viable strategy. Like, shouldn't Knights decks then have done very well in the MCQ weekend?
Don't think that those lists were particularly good, and they were playing against lists that had like deputies and stuff. Like, it is very different than the Sultai list now, right? When you're playing like either Simic with, lower curve, Questing Beast, Vivian.
No. I'm talking this MCQ weekend that just happened.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, how many people played Knights? It seemed
I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, it seemed like Sultai was a pretty big part of the metagame, certainly the winner's metagame. Antonino DeRosa 5-0'd with Red-Black Sacrifice, which is kind of doing a lot of similar stuff.
Right.
And granted, I think his list was more vulnerable to Veil of Summer than something like Emma's list was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was one of the things I wrote about in my article, that I actually did think that deck had a pretty tremendous vulnerability to something like Veil of Summer.
Yeah, but at the same point, like you see what I'm saying, right? Where it's like you play red-black stuff, don't walk into their cards that they are playing on behalf of the mirror match, and you just exploit them that way.
I see what you're saying. I really do. And I was right here saying it last week, right? Like, I thought I had a plan that could exploit this deck. And I'm getting to the point where I am afraid that this deck is just maybe unexploitable. Like, maybe this card is so good, I'm talking about Oko now, that it patches all these individual weaknesses on its own. It just does everything. And maybe it really is able to go that wide and account for that many things that it just doesn't have holes.
Dude, if they're cutting 2-drop accelerators for Noxious Grasps and to have like max Once Upon a Times, if they play turn 3 Oko and just like make a food, you can either just attack it down or not care. Or just like hit them, set up Embercleave for lethal next turn. If they have like Goose into Oko, obviously that's problematic. I don't know if you want to do something like play Bone Crusher Giant to try and like time walk you both. Or maybe just try and fix the mana to the point where you can play Shock or something.
But isn't that the core of the problem, is that they always have that? Like with London Mulligan plus Once Upon a Time, plus Gilded Goose, plus in some instances Arboreal Grazer, like you just have that such a large percentage of games. And I don't know what the numbers are, and I'm not a math person, so I'm not going to be able to figure them out for you. But with those kind of configurations, it seems like your percentage of turn 2 Okos, I mean, you've played the games. You know what it's like. You face an opponent playing this deck, and it feels like they always have it. And obviously that's bias, and we create these narratives and we buy into them. But there is a large percentage of games where you are routinely presented with turn 2 Oko.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't played against too many people on ladder who are mulling super hard. I know that Menguchi was one of the people who was talking about, it doesn't really matter. I mull to 5 in the mirror until I get turn 2 Oko or turn 3 Nissa. And that makes a lot of sense for mirror matches. I don't know if that is exactly what you're supposed to be doing in general, especially once you start adding like these slower, more clunky, expensive reactive cards to your deck. You start playing more things like Fabled Passage that kind of get in the way of those explosive draws, you know?
Sure.
So like, I don't think that you can necessarily take that approach with Sultai, and I think that people are still going to play Sultai because that's the narrative is you have to be prepared for Oko. So what do? I guess we just all main deck 4 Noxious Grasps, and then the format's 50% that and 50% people who are playing red something or like blue white, trying to not get hit by it. I think Sultai probably gets beat like Golos got beat at the last MC.
Very possible. Look, I'm pushing you a little bit on this point because if anything, I think our discussion last week underplayed the Yoko side of things, and I don't want to make that mistake going forward here. It's a very real problem. It's a very powerful deck, and I don't think we respected that enough as we were heading into the MCQ weekend. Like I said, the deck that I was high on did pretty miserably. I put 1 copy into day 2, and I think I was just off base. I don't think I had pushed things quite far enough in the direction things needed to be pushed. So I want to acknowledge that failing and not make it again going forward. I think you need to be hard targeting this deck. It's not enough to have a deck that is theoretically fine against it. You need to make sure you're fine if you're playing something besides Oko at this point.
So blue-white and Temur Rec, I think both have a pedigree for being very good against Sultai. And I think we could honestly just end the podcast there, but like people have been playing these decks. I've actually played with these 2 decks. I think the Sultai matchup is quite good. And that's like not even knowing how often I'm bricking their Noxious Grasps, right? Like obviously things change post-board or whatever, but the Simic decks or pilots, whatever, have had this problem throughout the entirety of Standard where they're not playing enough things like Disdainful Stroke, and they just like don't have the tools set up to beat these go bigger control decks because they haven't really needed to. And part of the thing that makes me successful, like when I was, crushing it with Cawblade or Delver or whatever, was that like I respected the small strategies. Aggro might not be a big portion of the metagame, but if I can make a couple small sacrifices in order to account for it and make sure that it's within my sideboarding plan and how I'm constructing my deck and everything, I will do that. And I think people just outright dismiss these decks. They're just like, oh, I'm going to play some mystical disputes or whatever. And then blue-white just like plays Drago with you until dispute doesn't do anything.
Right.
Like if these people playing Simic and Sultai were actually hard targeting Temur Rec and blue-white, I think it'd be a different story, but they're just not even close to doing that right now.
Right. One of the interesting adaptations I think you could argue for as the Noxious Grasp meta comes into focus is that there's another hate card in your main colors that still hits the mirror, maybe not as effectively, but does account for these problematic enchantments that are starting to pop up. Things like Wilderness Reclamation and Fires of Invention.
It's not enough, though.
That is Aether Gust. Do you think that's just not enough?
Have you ever played the Simic side of things with Gust against those decks?
I was low on Gust for a long time. I will tell you that. It always felt underwhelming to me.
Yeah, because unless you are doing things like actually pressuring them, if you had the Questing Beast, Vivian, Brazen Borrower package and you wanted to play Aether Gust instead as a plan against Temur Rec or whatever, I would support that. But when you are playing like this slow, Planeswalker-centric Hydroid Krasis game plan, you gust the Wilderness Rec and it just doesn't matter. They just do it again the same turn, the next turn. Like, it's not a big deal because you're not actually putting them under pressure. So even in the context of the mirror, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, your opponent plays turn 2 Oko, well, I'll Aether Gust it. And it's like, well, that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, actually, not much has been done.
Yeah, actually grasping it does something, which is why they're doing that. That's why they're splashing for Grasp and Vraska. But yeah, Gust just does not do enough when you're not pressuring your opponent.
Okay, I mostly agree with that. I think it's interesting in terms of an adaptation to some other decks that are popping up to prey on you. But like I said, it seems more like Veil of Summer does that job more effectively. You mentioned blue-white control. Like, you're still comfortable with blue-white control being favored against the Sultai decks, even in a world where they do have access to just max Veil of Summer?
I mean, I don't think anyone is necessarily playing max. Maybe they are, but like you still just get to do things like cast Time Wipe and Chemist's Insight and eventually set up a place where you can like Teferi on a dry board, and then you can start Agent of Treacherying them and mass manipulating them. Gadwick is another thing that's just like this really big, like kind of unbeatable thing where if you just give them a bunch of time, you're not actually clocking them. They're just going to bury you. And I played some games from Simic side last night where it was a huge issue. And I even had a sideboard plan with a bunch of disdainful strokes. And like I was taking that matchup into account. But my opponent played very, very well and ended up just like blanking, the 3 Veils and the 2 Disputes I brought in. I also had 3 strokes on top of it. And it seemed like a complete non-issue to the point where like I had to Veil at some point just to resolve a spell because they had Teferi in play, which is fine. But any one spell that you resolve is not going to beat the setup that they have with all the card drawing and all the late game power and stuff.
Well, Gerald, you know that no one is more willing to pick up blue-white control than I am. You're speaking my language right now. If this deck has promise going forward, I'm certainly among the most excited people in the room to hear that.
Yeah, you should try, man. Like I've played some with that deck too. It does take forever, obviously, because
awesome.
You have
love it.
Yeah, I know. You like this is not a downside for you. This is a feature, not a bug. But the deck is just kind of a pile of random cards, just like a mishmash of things, and it's very, very good. I don't think it's good in a vacuum, but as far as what the specific metagame is, I think that deck is actually awesome.
Nice. I am happy to hear that. It's very high up on my list of things to do in Standard. Certainly before we head out to Richmond, I will 100% be familiar with this deck. And let's be honest, I probably have a bias towards playing it. So if it is even close to reasonable, don't be surprised if I'm doing that when it comes to Richmond.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to check my Arena account right now because I need to see what rank I'm at to see if I have to actually play tonight before the ladder resets. Because I've been doing this thing where I like play a match or play 2 matches and like win them. All right, gain some ranks, and then I just like have to stop playing. Don't really like this system. I'm at 760 with 14 hours left. I might be okay.
I think you're probably safe. I think the churn is a little bit lower this particular go around. So I like your odds sitting at 760 right now.
But yeah, otherwise, I had been trying out various things. I tried like the Is It deck that's like Brineborn Cutthroat, Brazen Borrower, Bone Crusher Giant, Gadwick, mostly a Magic Online deck. But then you get to main deck Aethergust and Mystical Dispute just because they're like good cards, which is kind of great and hilarious. Played that against Simic a few times, thought it was decent at doing what it was trying to do, but it was also very strange where you would Bone Crusher Giant a thing early and then it would just chill in exile and it was like you were playing your hand face up, And then, playing some matches with that, it's like, okay, this is like kind of doing it, but in the mid to late game, my stuff like Ral's Outburst is just like a little clunky and not very effective for what I'm trying to be doing. And I really need something to turn the corner hard. And then it just kind of dawned on me that Temur Rec is doing the exact same stuff, but also just will blow them out of the water if they get to survive.
Sure. Yeah, I was pretty high on Temur Rec the few games I played with it a couple of weeks ago. I think it certainly has potential. Again, you know my feelings on Wilderness Reclamation. And if you're not worried about aggressive decks anymore, which right now it doesn't seem like you are, pretty sweet time to be doing that kind of stuff. One more deck I wanted to get your opinion on real quick was this Golgari Adventures deck by Chris Kvartek, who's just absolutely murdering it right now, qualified for yet another Arena MC. And I know you were high on this deck pre-field ban. You played it in a local PTQ. And this is certainly different from the look of your list. This gets much bigger. 3 Vraskas in the main deck, 2 Lilianas, Find, which is a card I know you were low on, plus those 4 Noxious Grasps. And then post-board, you're looking at a setup of 4 Veil of Summer for Duress. So I was just thinking about the blue-white deck, and if that's hard targeting the Simic approach to things, well, maybe this kind of setup is actually the way you want to go there. A little bit more aggression, a little bit more disruption. Any love for this new take on Golgari Adventures?
Yeah, I like his take a lot. My main issue with the deck before was like, okay, I think I have a good plan for fighting Golos with Questing Beast and Vivian, but a lot of the stuff that I'm doing doesn't really match up that well against Simic, and especially if the pilot is very smart, very well-versed in the matchup, very prepared for the things that my deck is capable of. I just felt like I was not able to really get any traction there. Like, there are some games where you can sort of snowball with Innkeeper, but even then, it just doesn't necessarily accomplish all that much. Like, you're getting cards, but then you have to work so much more for your cards to actually do anything compared to their cards in the mid game, right? Because they have like the powerful planeswalkers, they have Wicked Wolf, they have Hydroid Krasis, Nissa, and you're just like, yeah, I have a Foulmire Knight or whatever, you know? So in those instances, I actually found myself wanting Find Finality. The initial testing that I did, like, the games didn't really play out like that, and I'm guessing it is because my opponents were not great, and which is kind of like the problem with testing on ladder or in queues or whatever, just against random people, especially when your deck is relatively new or you have some weirdo tech choices or whatever. And
it also had a lot to do with Questing Beast, I bet, as well. Like, as the number of Questing Beasts has gone down, certainly games have extended.
Yeah, that's true too. That's definitely true. So yeah, I ended up wanting Find Finalities, and certainly against the way the decks are built now, I would want Find Finality. And obviously the 4 Noxious Grasps are going to help you a lot. The Vraskas are going to be very good because you're going to draw some cards and they're going to be like pretty bad permanents, or you're going to flood out. So having that to actually just be an engine and have this thing that continually kills Oko and like picks off their geese and Crasises and stuff is potentially very huge. Liliana might be a bit much, but maybe you need it.
Well, the deck feels like it can go big enough now. Like you mentioned, you could get to these points where you were doing your thing, you had reestablished your engine, and nothing you did mattered. It just was not enough to keep pace. I think Liliana is the one card that can always function as an exception to that. Multiple copies is something I'm pretty high on. And like I said, I really like what this deck can do in post-board games against these other options that now maybe you have to start accounting for when the format has shifted to a hard targeting type mode.
Yeah,
I would want to play against Sultai a bunch because I guarantee this matchup super skill intensive. It's going to have a ton of decisions. It's going to be all about how you play it. It's going to be about slow rolling your edge wall innkeepers in the right spot, pushing them in the other spots, judiciously managing your removal. But if you think about the cards present in this deck, there's so many ways to contain an Oko. That card is unlikely to just run away with the game on its own. And I also like the addition of Castle Locthwain back into the mix. As like you said, as games get longer, just having these persistent value engines is going to pay a lot of dividends and mitigate flood just a little bit, which this deck has had issues with in the past.
Yeah, I played one castle in the PTQ and it was decent. I activated it a few times, but it was hard to tell whether or not it actually had any bearing on the outcome of the game. And obviously it gets a lot worse when you start adding like Lilianas and Find Finalities to your deck. Like, you just end up needing it a little bit less. But yeah, after that PTQ, I kind of just written off the deck because the Simic matchup or Bant matchup was pretty poor, but things have changed a lot and Chris's list is very good. So yeah, I'm going to add that back to my list and actually test that again, because it's not fully a deck that dodges Noxious Grasp, but it kind of does. You know, like, you're going to sandbag your Innkeeper or your Vraska until you actually get some value out of it, and then they finally get a chance to use their removal spell, but it's kind of too little too late at that point.
Yep, that's been my read on it. Also, I will take this opportunity to, just like everyone else, praise Chris. I was very impressed watching a bunch of his games during the last Mythic Championship, but beyond that, this is just good deck building. And this is twice now where we were very impressed with his take on Simic leading into the PT. This is another really nice, really innovative take on the archetype. Chris Kovar rapidly climbing those clout rankings. We mentioned Croaky's also climbing the clout rankings very quickly. Kovar these two just marching up towards the top, challenging Andre for that number 1 slot. Maybe I'm going to give it to him, Andre. You better do something soon. Save this MC for me to save your number 1 spot.
Well, it's funny. So Mox Boarding House had the Chalice last weekend, their charity event, and I showed up on Sunday, like towards the end of it, just to hang out with people, and like Brad and BBD were there. They played in the event. Brad won it, and you know, they live around here now and everything. So was chatting with them a little bit, and at some point Brad asked me like who is this Chris guy? Because like, he's got a lot of points, and like, he's probably going to be MPL. Did he like top 8 a PT? And it's like, well, he top 8 at a PT, and then he lost playing for top 8 of the next PT, and then he day 2'd and like had a deep run at the last Arena PT, And yeah, he had just like top 16 and queued for this one. It's like, dude is crushing it. Absolutely crushing it.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I've been asking the same questions because I think he's from New York, and
he is.
I was from New York, and I have never crossed Chris, as far as I know, ever in my Magic career. I don't know, like, if he was downstate or upstate or what, but I want more info on this Chris Kovar tech. I want to know more because he is, like I said, really, really impressing. I think everyone involved with the game at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we'll try and get him on the podcast at some point, I'm sure.
I like it. Good idea.
But yeah, he's only got 550 followers on Twitter, which is just absurd.
Unacceptable.
Yeah, well, he's not out there like, posting his deck list and like, talking about how much he's crushing it or whatever. He's just like doing it very silently, right? Mm-hmm. So he's not getting nearly enough promotion, and they started to promote him a little bit at the last Arena MC, like they actually did a write-up on him and stuff. But yeah, Kovar Tech on Twitter.
Check him out.
Yeah, what else you got for me? I guess my testing list is now Temur Rec at the top, and then maybe Chris's Golgari deck. I've played some with the blue-white deck, and it's just not for me. I do think it is very good, though. And then I've basically crossed off the list, too. I don't think Selesnya Adventures can beat Massacre Girl, Fine Finality, the stuff that these Sultai lists are playing. I could play Sultai in theory. I just think that I have a bigger edge finding ways to dodge all of the inbred nonsense that they're doing. And then Knights is another thing that I have to mess around with at some point. Rakdos.
I think that's a great list heading into this MC. That's a great place to focus. Nothing else really springs to mind. You and I talked about an interesting deck list we received over on the Arena Decklist account. It was an Orzhov Doom Foretold list, and I wrote about it in my article this week. It was from Weston Anderson, and I'm not sold on this list. I don't want you to think I'm putting this over as like the truth, but it's basically like a Burglar Rat, Charming Prince, Yarrick's Fenlurker, Duress, Doom Foretold, Davriel deck list. And you can find it on the @Arena Decklist Twitter account. There's something interesting about it in terms of restriction of resources that I don't think has really been attempted in this format. And you couldn't do in the average format because just some aggro deck would punish you. Some deck that didn't need to be super resource intensive would make the strategy look very, very foolish. But this is a format where cards build off of each other. And the only way to keep pace with like the Gilded Goose into Oko, into Nissa, into Hydroid Krasis type things is to assemble your own powerful engine or be hyper focused on disrupting that engine. Those are really your only two paths forward.
Yeah.
And this skirts all of that. This is just restrict all your resources, give you no options. You can't combine your cards in meaningful ways. And something like main deck duress is probably underexplored, quite frankly. Breaking up things in the early game while you establish your A plan. And in the case of Doom Foretold, that A plan is also restricting resources. There's something interesting here. I want to explore the ideas contained. I don't think they're going to bear any fruit, but in terms of like the wild long shot that could potentially do something to this format that could push it in a different direction, strategies like this are interesting to me.
It is interesting. I don't think it's particularly good, though.
I mostly agree, but you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yes,
like there's this
absolutely
weird axis that the format really isn't prepared to account for. And I love that. Like if you can find an axis that nobody is interacting on, that nobody really is considering any of their deck building, you can get a powerful edge. There's some bad cards in this deck. That's what it comes down to. Like you're playing Burglar Rat and Yarrick's Fenlurker. Nobody wants to do that into a field of Oko. So I don't know how you solve that situation. And you probably can't, but I did think it was a really interesting idea and I just wanted to call it out.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to the thing that I stated earlier where Oko is very clearly enemy number one. There are cool things that you can do now knowing that. You just have to go out and explore and actually get them. I've provided a laundry list of things that I'm still working on trying and things that I have tried already. And for the most part, like they're decent. Obviously there's like the rest of the format to consider, but like what does the rest of the format actually entail? You know,
I have no idea at this point. No idea. We're rapidly approaching uncharted territory for this standard format in terms of deck penetration. Does look like pre-Jace banning is the closest analog I've seen. And that even like Jace's ubiquitousness in that format was across a bunch of decks. Like there was Rug and there was like, I think that's the time where Time Warp style decks existed, like big mana decks based on Oracle of Moldiah. Maybe I have my time frame a little crossed here.
That was a little before, I think.
Okay.
I think the Time Warp deck happened. I could be wrong. Yeah, because like I played Time Warp in an SCG, and I don't think I would have played that if like Caw-Blade were legal. You know?
Yeah, that might be prior to that. There was also a Boros aggro deck, I think, at that time, and none of these were as good as Caw-Blade, quite frankly. But
Rug wasn't even as good as Caw-Blade, but people still played it. It was
it wasn't.
It was like Caw-Blade, but worse, and people were like, "Yeah, I'm about that life."
There was also like mono green Eldrazi that would occasionally show up.
Yeah, I mean that deck was actually good against Caw-Blade.
Yeah, so there were a couple other options, and many of them contain Jace, like Rug, but the real takeaway is just how congealed around a single archetype this format is. It's kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree completely. I side with SCG and their decision to change the format. I hope it doesn't impact people negatively, but most of what I've seen so far has been positive, and people having like their excitement for the event rekindled and everything. So I'm about it.
What are we doing going forward, Gerry? I mean, has to be a real question, right?
I don't know. I'm gonna like play Team Rec or something weird at the Pro Tour. Hope I get paired against a bunch of Simic people. And
no, I'm not talking about you. We'll figure out exactly what we're going to do in the next week or so. I'm talking about Magic and Standard.
Oh, they'll ban Gilded Goose on Monday or something.
I'd actually be okay with that. I think that's pretty acceptable. You're of the opinion that Oko remains safe?
I don't know. It's weird when it's, $80 or whatever it is now.
Yeah, mine are $600. So
well,
you know how I feel about the situation.
Yeah, I'm paying you too much.
Right.
I think it would be very awkward for them to take a half measure after the Hogak thing. I think they caught a lot of flack from that. And
this is different, though. It really is a different situation.
Is it? Like, Oko's the problem, right? It is a combination of things. Obviously, all the mana acceleration, all the card advantage, Hydrocrisis, Nissa, all of that is problematic.
It feels like everything. It feels like everything mushed together. And I think making it an okay deck is a totally reasonable approach in this situation. I think you can live with that, but maybe you can't. I don't know. I wouldn't want to have to make this decision. That's all I will say. You're right. Oko's the problem. Like, I'm skirting around the issue and trying to find a solution because I don't know that that's a realistic answer. But
what would be the biggest nerf to the deck if you could ban one card?
Can I ban more than one card? I mean, like, that's what I would really like to do.
No, one card.
It's Oko.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, without question.
And if you wanted to ban two cards but keep Oko, is it Goose Nissa?
I think you have to look at Once Upon a Time at some point and just how it... No, but there's a problem with the way it requires games to play out. And the certainty of having those accelerants is like a real issue. I would look at it. I don't know that that's the answer. And like a really, really clean thing to do would just be get rid of the 1 mana accelerants. But I also now have full art foil Gilded Geese, which I paid a lot of money for. So I'm going to be angry about that too.
Well,
if that ends up being the solution.
They went up, so you can always sell it. So you can always sell them. They are also a modern all-star.
Yes.
So you're not losing out on too much.
They're also the new Deathrite Shaman. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, I believe we answered that on the cast. Was it last week?
I think it was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like so long ago. So much has happened.
I know. Millions of things have happened.
Yeah, one mana accelerators I think are pretty silly. I think if you get rid of Oko, the Goose is more of a Lotus Petal than it is a Llanowar Elf.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably fine, but then food just in general doesn't see a lot of standard play, which, kind of sucks because it's one of the set mechanics and whatever. But yeah, you could look at obviously Nissa, Krasis, Once Upon a Time, things like that. If I were in the building, I would want to just go super hard on examining the data and look at things like play draw and how often turn 2 Oko happens and how much the win rates change when you don't play Goose on turn 1 and stuff like that. I don't think you can just look at matchup percentages.
Sure.
No,
that sounds like a good approach.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I'd have a lot of fun playing with that data. But yeah, standard mess up, and we should talk about Pioneer because Pioneer great.
Let's do that. And let's talk about why we're doing that. I mean, we're kind of torn right now, right? Like usually we focus in pretty hard on one topic per show, but I honestly do think our listener base is split right now. I think the broader listener base more than anything wants to hear about Pioneer. This is the point of excitement in Magic as it stands right now. I also think we have a duty to prepare people who are headed to this MC who have standard tournaments to play, and I don't want to neglect that side of things.
Yeah, like me. What the hell, man?
It doesn't seem like you, like me as well. So I'm happy to talk about that, but that is why we're doing these split format shows. And I know it's a little weird and a little outside our usual operating procedure.
It's fine. We've done this before.
Yeah, this is the second week in a row, though. And that's generally not how we approach things. But I just wanted to explain to our listeners who, both sides probably feel a little slighted. The folks who want 3 hours on Pioneer are upset we're talking about Standard, and the folks who want 3 hours on Standard are upset we're talking about Pioneer. So you understand why we're doing it.
So we'll split them and just make both camps unhappy. That's what we decided to do.
As long as everyone hates us, that's the ideal outcome.
Yeah, I agree with you. The problem with Standard is that there's only so much you can talk about, right? And I would like to be able to be like, oh, I played 100 matches with Team Rec and here are my results and all that, but I have not had the time to do that. So I've been creating content on the SCG side of things for Pioneer mostly because it is the new hot thing, and have been playing some also just because I want to and it's fun for me, and I should not work 24 hours a day even though I want to. But been doing a decent amount of Pioneer, and I think what we covered in Standard is acceptable, and hopefully that's okay and we don't get yelled at.
I hope so too. But basically our excitement for Pioneer is at a peak, and the only thing that could amplify it would be unfiltered access to the format, the freedom to just build and brew and play absolutely whatever we want, regardless of cost.
Look,
and
man,
our friends.
Listen, you have a credit card. You can buy foil extended art Gilded Gooses. You could buy Pioneer stuff on Moto too.
I could, but instead, our friends at Card Hoarder have stepped in. Yes, I don't recommend it either. Our friends at Card Hoarder have stepped in to do a little sponsorship for us and hooking us up with just large accounts and saying, Brian and Gerry, go to town, break this format in half. We couldn't be happier to do so, and just wanted to take a moment to shout out our friends at Card Hoarder. And if you're looking to get into the Pioneer format, this is definitely the way to do it.
Yeah, I've always heard good things about these rental services and like Card Hoarder specifically, but had never done it myself because it was like, I would just have like the one modern deck that I was working on, and then I would sell that and buy another deck. And now Pioneer happens, and it's like, well, I just want to have access to all these cards, and this is by far the best, like most cost efficient way to do it if you are trying to play Magic online and test out a bunch of different ideas and stuff.
Yeah, really excited to be able to engage with the format this broadly. And that also means that you and I are going to be free to make all the content we want in this format. And what we're talking about recording right now, some matchup breakdowns where we just play a matchup and really go in depth on our thoughts as we play. Much like if you've watched our Brawl series over on the Arena Decklist YouTube page, you'll see our pretty faces down in the corners. You'll see both of our hands at the same time. And we'll just talk through our decision process and exactly what we're trying to accomplish. I think I would want to start with the pillars of the format. I'd really like to do something with like Sultai Control versus one of the other top decks as you see it. So maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, the first two I was thinking of was Sultai versus Phoenix and Sultai versus Copycat.
I like both those a lot, and I think that's a great place to start. Maybe we should talk about why we're pegging those as maybe the decks we need to focus on right now. There was the first big Pioneer tournament, the Pioneer Challenge on Magic Online, and it was in fact won by Sultai Midrange, Sultai Control. What are we calling this deck?
I would say Midrange. It's Thoughtseize, spot removal. There are a couple counter spells, but they're only incidental counter spells in Drown in the Lock and Gilded Goose, Oko, Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Courser Crewfix, stuff like that.
This deck looks cool. This deck looks like what I want to do in Magic. And the fact that this is where the format's starting, this is the first successful deck, it's got to be pretty promising, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't really get the opportunity to play mid-range or control, like some sort of reactive deck in a brand new format. But this deck is proactive in that specifically the first place list has 8 planeswalkers, not counting Jace VP. And then you have things like Thoughtseize, you have Abrupt Decay Assassin's Trophy, which cover a lot of different problematic cards in the format. And you just have a bunch of good card advantage and life gain and stuff. So like, it doesn't really have a downside, and you're playing most of the removal and cards in general that just say kill a thing, like whatever your opponent's trying to do. Mm-hmm. And decks like this can just beat up on synergy decks very, very well.
Yeah, we talked a bunch about the quality of removal in the format, and I think we were trending towards Fatal Push as like the de facto best removal spell. I actually think it's Abrupt Decay. I think that's the key point of interaction for these decks. And a lot of decks will be playing both, obviously. So that's a moot point. As you see in this first place list, 4 copies of Abrupt Decay, 4 copies of Fatal Push. But for me, Abrupt Decay's stock has really risen as I've thought more about the format. Bought 4 foil Abrupt Decays when I was at SCG Atlanta this weekend. Of course, got to make sure they're shining. They're really cheap. I was surprised at how cheap they were. But yeah, I think that's my focal point right now. And this is a deck that I'm so pleased to see having success early, because this is really what I love to play.
Yeah, I was excited about this deck too. I wrote up a sideboard guide for our patrons and posted it on the website, and it looks really good. And from this first place list, there's very, very little I want to change. So shout out to Oars, and I believe to Aspiring Spike, who built like the initial version of this, and Spike also got 3rd place in the tournament.
Yeah, slightly different list. Fewer planeswalkers in Aspiring Spike's deck. No Liliana, The Last Hope, no Vraska. What do you think about Vraska in the first place list? I'll be honest, that's not a card I had particularly targeted as a big player in this format.
Well, Spike is not playing Gilded Goose and has a lot of the check lands instead of the fast lands, whereas Oars was like, well, I'm going to just play a bunch of planeswalkers, play the Goose, and play the fast lands. And I like that approach better.
Me too.
But Vraska, I think, is pretty good for a lot of the same reasons that Abrupt Decay is good. And obviously you run into some issues maybe with having diminishing returns on things that say kill CMC 3 or less. But the reason I like Decay a lot is because of all the 3-mana planeswalkers running around. And some decks just have a bunch of them. So having access to Vraska that can do that either repeatedly or do it and then be card filtering engine, life gain engine, stuff like that seems really good to me, especially if you have Goose to accelerate into it.
Do you see a window to exploit is a little generous right now? Large CMC creatures, something like Gurmag Angler comes to mind. Is there a weakness in the format right now?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I see it as well.
Look at this deck. I mean, you have Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay, but like the problem is it also has Oko.
Right. Oko solves all problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's 4 Okos in Spike's list, 3 in Orz's list, and then both of them have an Assassin's Trophy. They have 2 Drown in the Locks. Like, they're pretty well covered, honestly.
Right.
But in general, I think, you play against a deck that has 4 Fatal Push, 4 Abrupt Decay. You play a 4 or 5 mana creature, and it might be trouble for them. Yeah.
Mostly agree. You're right, though. There's a lot of catch-up mechanisms and catch-all mechanisms, I should say. Thoughtseize, let's not forget that. Right. Any problem your deck might have, you can just answer it through Thoughtseize. And with Jace Vryn's Prodigy, it's not like Thoughtseizes is only your early game card, only ripping it off the top. Like, you can set up Thoughtseize in key spots as well.
Yeah, of course. Jace is so good. And one of the common things I've seen from going over the Pioneer Decklist Twitter account is people playing Jace in Band Company with like 4 Collected Companies, 2 Dromokas commands, and no other spells main deck. And people just commenting like, oh, your Jace is so bad, why is it in the deck? And it's like, y'all forgot about Standard 3 years ago when this was just the thing. This is what people did because Jace as a Merfolk leader for the first few turns is awesome. And then Jace that gets to affect the board in a decent amount by making creature combat a lot easier for you is awesome. And then if you ever get to flashback a spell with it, boom, like is basically already paid for itself, but now you get an extra Collected Company on top of it. Like Jace doesn't need a lot of help to be incredible, and it's basically always incredible.
Yeah, if you didn't live through the Jace era, you're probably underestimating this card. A lot of folks did when Jace Vryn's Prodigy came out. It's easy to remember it costing $50, but if you actually go back to release time, there were a lot of people who were not high on this card. I know this because I was very high on it and I ordered a bunch of them and I made a lot of money on it. So its power is not clear on its face. As you play more and more games, you understand just how impactful this effect is. And getting a really good Planeswalker for 2 mana, you can't beat that. I mean, we've seen Wrenn and 6. Jace Vryn's Prodigy is like the predecessor to Wrenn and 6, and it's got a lot more vulnerabilities. But when it flips, the power is there, 100%.
So it's 2 mana. It is a single pip, which means it's pretty easy to splash or splash other things in your blue deck.
Yep.
It gets to filter you through like basically however many cards you want, right? Because you can either choose to loot before you cast your spell, or you can play a couple spells and then loot with Jace to transform it. Or you can loot a couple times and then use those cards to delve for dig through time or whatever and continue looting. Or you can just like flip it on turn 3, turn 4, and you just have this thing that immediately takes up to 6 loyalty and nerfs a creature a little bit. And then you get to untap and like kill 2 things and you still have this Planeswalker lying around. Like, it is very good. It's 2 mana and it's effectively must kill unless you're doing something that just completely ignores your opponent.
Spot on. I think that's an accurate assessment.
And if you don't have a spell to flash back, whatever. You know, you're playing creatures, you're doing your collected company thing, you looted a few times, so hopefully you have a good amount of traction. You've been able to make your land drops and use your mana every turn, and you got a bunch of stuff going on, and you have this Planeswalker that's just ticking up. And then if you ever draw a collected company, boom, you just like cast it and flash it back over the course of 2 turns probably, and you're just money. You're set.
Yeah, you probably found another Jace and all of that if you need it, and you get even more collected companies from your graveyard. It chains very rapidly, basically.
Yeah, I've also like posted some decks where people are just like, yo, is Jace even good in this deck? And the answer is always yes.
100% of the time.
Always yes. Anyway, card is busted. One of the defining cards in the format. I mean, it's not the only reason why people are playing like Fatal Push and Wild Slash. Obviously, there are things like Monastery Swiftspear that you have to kill, but like Jace is the scariest 2-drop, I think.
There's some challengers to that throne, and maybe we find them in the second place list in this Pioneer Challenge. I don't think we initially intended to work through this top 8, but maybe that's just the best place to start with discussion of the format.
Yeah, I like it. Nam playing Is It Phoenix? I was initially pretty low on this deck, and then after seeing it in action, it's like, okay, yeah, this plays out a lot better than I thought it would, because you get access to things like Fiery Temper, you get to play Lightning Axe, which is way above rate for removal in this format. And
that is true.
Yeah, you actually don't really care about the discard part of it because you're either manacing a Fiery Temper, discarding a Phoenix, or filling your graveyard for Treasure Cruise.
Yeah, very fair point. This is certainly the deck that pushes on the blue delve spells the hardest. Like, this is the best 4 Treasure Cruise deck I've seen thus far. I didn't think the Arclight Phoenix offense was going to be enough, but when I'm talking about Abrupt Decay being the best removal spell, and then that closely followed by Fatal Push, you can understand why Arclight Phoenix is finding success. Do you have your eyes right now on a removal spell that is going to have to become a larger part of the format if Arclight Phoenix is here to stay?
A lot of my sideboards have Magma Spray.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Is there something else I'm missing out on?
What's the text on Deck in Stone? It's been so long since I've cast a Deck in Stone. Doesn't that hit all copies of a card?
It does, yeah. Yeah, it's good against tokens. If you exile like 2 Phoenixes with it, they get 2 clues. But
yeah, I think you can mostly live with that exchange. I like Deck in Stone. That seems like a removal spell that should maybe get some more traction. But unsurprisingly, white seems to be the worst color by a pretty good margin in Pioneer. And we did expect that going into things. The only thing white really enables is multicolored spells and Felidar Guardian. Yeah,
there's Felidar Guardian and Teferi. There are some Azorius control decks that have Teferi Time Raveler and maybe go up to Teferi Hero of Dominaria and stuff. But the 2-mana removal is not great. Blessed Alliance, Last Breath, Seal Away, and Deck in Stone are some of the things that I've seen people play, but there's just not a good 1-mana option. But the gold cards are solid. Oh, Azorius Drum too, if that counts.
Sure.
Yeah, like your 2-mana removal is fine, but it is way narrower than what everyone else is doing. Like, why would you play Azorius Control when you can play something like Sultai or even just Dimir, you know?
Now, that's the eternal question. Gerry, and for some reason, people always talk themselves into Azorius control, myself included.
Yeah.
So we just do it. I don't know why, but I agree. As it stands right now in this format, Sultai way more appealing to me if I'm trying to take a longer game approach.
Hell yeah, dude. I love it. I love hearing that. I guess it's because you have those foil gooses. That's probably why.
Right. Although I also have those foil Fae of Wishes. Maybe I can find a home for those too.
I highly doubt it.
We shall see.
All right, third place, Aspiring Spike with Sultai. Another good person to follow on Twitter because he regularly brews in Modern and now Pioneer and has some of the sweetest deck lists, decks that I really respect, and also can do quite well with them. So,
for sure.
Third place with Sultai. He lost to Nam in the top 4 playing Phoenix. And then in fourth place, we got a little Mono Blue Devo. 4 copies of Quench. Thanks, I hate it.
Quench gets better when the mana bases are built around the fast lands. I'll say that. Like when you're playing your 4th land tapped a lot of the times, I am convinced you'll catch more with Quench. But the cards contained in this deck, I am surprised they have added up to a successful Magic deck. You're not really interacting in very meaningful ways. This has the tiniest pinch of disruption imaginable, and that's supposed to carry the day. And you just lean on your Master of Waves and Tempest Djinns and end the game pretty quickly. I guess that's fine while things are unfocused.
Check this out. This deck has 4 Mutavaults, right? 24 land.
Yeah.
You have 4 Tempest Djinns.
Yep.
Merfolk Trickster, Harbinger of the Tides, stuff like that, right?
Never cast any of those cards.
You need blue on turn 2, blue on turn 3.
Yep.
Maybe need is a strong word. I suppose you could copter and then play Tempest Djinn on 4 or whatever, but then why? Why not just play a bunch of islands? If you want your colorless land to be a Nykthos, it's probably going to be very powerful and also free roll the actual color source on turn 4. So I think that's fine. And then at that point, you have so many wizards, you can just play Wizard's Retort instead of Quench. I would be so much happier doing that, or even just playing Spell Pierce instead. Because what creatures do you care about with this deck? You have Trickster and Harbinger and Brazen Borrower. Right. You have Thassa, these flyers, whatever. What do you care about creatures for? Just play Pierce.
Mostly agree. I mean, I would consider Stubborn Denial as well. We've talked about this though, and that does have some flaws, but definitely a little concerned about Quench and concerned about this deck in general. And maybe the entire plan is to discard the Mutavaults to the Smuggler's Copter, and that's how you deal with them.
I guess. I mean, that takes a lot of setup, but yeah, I suppose it gets there eventually. A decent amount of people have actually had success with Mono Blue Devotion, and it always looks pretty bad, but then still performs kind of well. And at least this time it has reasonable Magic cards in it, right?
Yeah, it should be hyper consistent. And when people are still figuring out a format, I can understand why this deck preys on a lot of the weirder stuff you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, you got Clock, you got some tricksiness, you have a lot of different ways to actually use your mana, you have some counterspells as Disruption, there are Spyglasses in the sideboard and stuff, so you're covered.
Yeah, do you think they know Pithing Needle is legal and they chose to play Spyglass over Pithing Needle?
Look, the decks are weird, right? And maybe you just don't know.
Just want the info?
You're like, yo, my opponent is obviously doing some weird stuff. I bet Needle would be good against them. I have no idea what to name though.
I'm not saying 100% it's wrong. I'm just asking the question. Because I think that's a reasonable thing to forget about. And I think if I had started building my decks in this format, there's a good chance I missed Pithing Needle.
That's fair.
Eventually, I would get it right.
Right. But I mean, you start your sideboard with 4 Negate, 4 Spell Pierce. To me, it's just I haven't really thought too much about fine-tuning my list. So I could see Spyglass making it in because they forgot about Needle or because they didn't have Needle on their account, but they did happen to have Spyglass. Or They were just I want to play in this tournament because it sounds fun, but I don't know what I'm going to play against, and this will make it easier, you know?
Sure. Defensible.
I don't know. People can do whatever they want.
Agreed.
5th place, Mental Misstep, 4 colors Saheeli. This list looks very good. Mental Misstep has a bunch of trophies. I assume with this list, my list is pretty similar to this.
Any takeaways as far as this deck goes? Anything people are doing wrong? Anything you'd like to see more of going forward?
I'm writing about it this week. So that will be up on Star City probably the same time as this podcast. And I like Oko, Saheeli, Teferi. All of those are wonderful, wonderful Magic cards. You don't have a lot of good options for 2-mana things, so I would want to play a bunch of 1-mana things. Like Gilded Goose is obviously very good with Oko, and then there ain't nothing wrong with just playing Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves to accelerate into those cards. You just have to play a bunch of dual lands.
Sure.
And then 2-drop, 2 Heart of Kirin. I also agree with that. I think that's a good number for that. If they, if you get unlucky somehow and they manage to kill your 1-drop, you need something to do on turn 2. Heart of Kirin is probably the best thing to follow up with a Planeswalker. And then Heart either pressures their Planeswalkers, or defends your Planeswalkers, so that's great. And then you have Oath of Nissa, Felidar Guardian. Mental Misstep has 2 Reflector Mage, 2 Rogue Refiner. Rogue Refiner kind of helps free roll the Aether hubs. And they're not playing any Attune with Ethers or anything. This is just like a 5-color land, and Rogue Refiner is a backup source of energy. That is also good when being blinked, but I don't think you necessarily need to take that approach. Reflector Mage, obviously, very, very strong, very good with Felidar Guardian. We never got to see that in Standard. And then...
Yeah, probably a good thing.
Yeah, and then the list is rounded out by like a random Brazen Borrower, 1 Once Upon a Time, 2 Wild Slash. Wild Slash, I think, is very good because it interrupts the combo.
Yep.
In mirror matches where they have to -3 Saheeli onto Felidar, which leaves it at 1 loyalty and gives you a window to actually shock that thing. And then it's a very cheap piece of interaction for killing opposing mana dorks from like Mono Green Devotion and killing Monastery Swiftspears from red decks. So Wild Slash, if you can cast it, I think is very good.
You mentioned no good 2s. I would consider Walking Ballista in this deck. I think that's totally reasonable to just play Ballista on 2.
It's fine. It's not good.
Yeah, you can end up with a lot of mana in the late game as well. And picking off multiple mana dorks is fine. I wanted to ask you about the Once Upon a Time numbers, because I don't have a sense of what this number is supposed to be. I proposed a theory in commentary on the SCG Tour this weekend that the correct number of Once Upon a Time is always 0, 1, or 4. This theory was based on nothing. It's literally just me just saying a thing that I, for some reason, feel in my heart and can't tell you why I feel that way with any kind of clear reasoning. I need to suss it out a little bit more and understand exactly why I feel that way. But 1, what do you think about that? 2, what do you think about the number of Once Upon a Time for this particular deck?
So a while back, I gave Andrew Brown a foil Japanese Ulvenwald Mysteries, because we used to do a segment on the podcast that he really liked that I eventually killed. But I looked through my collection, I found this thing, and I was like, oh, it's 2 years, 3 years after Andrew left the podcast. I think he would like this. So I gave this to him. He seemed very happy about it. Today, I picked up my roommate from work who works at Wizards and is in play design, works with Andrew and all that. And he handed me a present. It was a sleeve with a card in it and had a piece of paper over it that said, "From Abro to Gerry." And I lifted the sleeve, and it was a foil full art Once Upon a Time.
Okay, see, we have an issue right now, Gerald.
What's up?
Because I talked to Andrew last week, and I knew he had gotten this full art foil Once Upon a Time. And we had some discussions about it.
Okay.
And I was like, I would really love a foil full art Once Upon a Time for my Primeval Titan deck. If you were thinking about what to get me for Christmas, you could certainly consider sending that my way. And it seemed like he was into that. It seemed like he thought,
my God,
it would be a nice thing to do for me.
Are you telling me that this thing that I thought was mine and was just like this very nice gift, like I gave him an Ulvenwald Mysteries and then he gave me this $100 card or whatever? Are you telling me that this thing is supposed to go to you instead?
I think now that maybe this is a secret plot to tear us apart and put us against each other on behalf of Andrew, maybe setting up for a return to the podcast. Who knows exactly what his motivations are right now? Or
he's trying to get you to quit and to go work for Wizards.
Also a possibility. Who knows? You always have to watch Andrew. He's always up to something.
Anyway, so we're going to come back to this. First, I want to point out that this segue was because I wanted to point out that I now have a foil full art Once Upon a Time, so I'm only going to play 1 copy in this deck.
Okay, so it's obviously correct based on that.
But from what I'm hearing now, and this is messed up. Like, why would he get my hopes up like this if it's not for me?
I don't know, man. Like I said, there's something going on here. This is an Ulvenwald mystery, actually.
Oh my God. This story just has layers, man.
That was the whole setup, is he just wanted to make an Ulvenwald mystery happen on the podcast.
So I don't like get my hopes up very often because I had been burned a lot as a child, right? So
Sure.
I was used to constant disappointment, and then I learned, this is like actually pretty sad. I learned to just expect nothing from anyone and kind of just assume that the worst was going to happen, and then when it didn't, I would be pleasantly surprised.
Right.
Right? So from maybe like 10 years old to like 30 years old, that's how I lived my life.
Okay.
Nice things would happen. I would be like, yeah, there's probably a catch. Maybe I'll get hit by a car later or something. I don't know. And I just like never allowed myself to be happy about things. Recently, I have been kind of working on that and been allowing myself to be happy about, just being alive and the people who are in my life and the people I care about and all the nice small things that happen on a daily basis, while also trying to not sweat the other stuff.
Right. And are you going to tell me that this foil Once Upon a Time has you now questioning that stance?
Yeah, I think I might be like relapsing or whatever. I don't know. Like,
wow.
So Veen got in my car, he handed this thing to me, and I was just like, what is this? Oh, damn. Like, this is nice, right? Like, this is maybe one of the nicest things that, people have done for me. Without context, it could have said like, to Gerry, give to Bryan or whatever, and I would have been like, oh, okay, cool. Like, Bryan's getting this nice thing. But yeah, now I don't even know, man. I'm messed up. But I guess I'm playing 0 Once Upon a Times in this deck.
Yeah, you're out on Once Upon a Time. I actually do already have a foil full art Once Upon a Time that I open in my collector's booster. So maybe it's best that we both just play one foil Once Upon a Time in our Felidar Guardian decks.
No, man, it's fine. I will give it to you if that was the intended nature of it. I just feel like I was tricked. I was duped.
I don't know.
So yeah, I'm gonna have to work that through my system, but we can leave that behind. That was an awkward moment in the podcast history. But yeah, 0, 1, or 4, I can kind of buy into. One copy of Once Upon a Time in this deck, to me, sort of makes sense because you have 18 creatures, 21 land, not a whole lot of variability for options.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you open on this, you're generally looking for a very specific thing. It's like, oh, I need my second or third land. I want a 1-drop dork. I want to find my Felidar Guardian, whatever.
Right.
And you're going to cast it and you're only going to have one option. You're not going to be able to like pick between like a 2-drop or a 3-drop or a 4-drop to fill out your curve. So I don't necessarily like having this card in the deck at all. And
okay.
I certainly don't want 4 copies because you are pretty tight on mana and you have plenty of things to do with your mana already and a lot of planeswalkers that get you extra value and you're like blinking Oath of Nissa and bouncing it with Teferi and stuff like that. So I just don't think that you have a lot of time to actually cast Once Upon a Time, even on like turn 6.
Yeah, this feels like a 1 or 0 deck for sure. I'm not sure which of those is correct, but when I have a lot of misses, I'm more inclined to just do the one thing. And then basically I look at it as you just are really trying to incentivize hitting that 1-drop accelerant. And now you get to play 10 virtual copies as opposed to 9 and also get some utility out of it if it doesn't prove to be that.
Yeah, so you could just play more 1-drops, but obviously there's some diminishing returns there, and at some point you would rather just have a Once Upon a Time in your opening hand instead of another 1-drop.
Yep.
So I can understand diversifying a little bit that way. Awkwardly enough, the current list that I have slated to go up in my article has 4 copies of Once Upon a Time, and I'm being a lot greedier with my mana.
Okay. I look forward to seeing that. I do think there's a world where if you're making enough mana, you can justify this. I'm also going to assume, and maybe I'm wrong, I'm going to assume you have 4 copies of Attune with Aether in that deck?
No, so that's the thing is I cut Aether Hub and I cut Rogue Refiner.
Okay.
That's why I wanted additional ways to fix my mana and be able to find the correct colored source or find the Gilded Goose on turn 1. And I just kind of hope that the things that I'm thinking about where on turn 6 I won't have the mana to cast this isn't necessarily true.
Okay. Interesting.
It's also awkward because I have a lot of spells in my sideboard, like non-creature, non-land stuff. So I end up siding them out in like a third of the matchups, I think, which is a blessing and a curse, right? It's like, oh, cool, I have this easy thing that I can turn to side out, but it's like also kind of part of the mana base and is part of the consistency of the deck. But when you're boarding in like Fry, Mystical Dispute, Rest in Peace, stuff like that, you don't necessarily need to curve 1 to 3 every time either. So
okay. That makes sense.
But dude, all of this adds up to I still have no idea what the correct amount of Once Upon a Times is in any deck.
It is a puzzle we were all trying to solve fervently, and obviously the correct answer is always based on how many full art foil copies you own. So keep making your decisions that way, and hopefully clarity will come to you.
I guess it's 0 for me because despite this
correct.
one having my name on it, it was not actually meant for me.
Sounds correct to me.
So yeah, I guess I'm cutting these 4, adding 2 lands and 2 wild slashes or whatever. I don't know.
Such is life.
God, this podcast is weird. What a weird episode. All right, 6th place, more 4-color Saheeli. This one
Harness
is
Lightning this time.
Yeah, less Oko, more Attune with Ether, Harness Lightning, Rogue Refiner. I don't like the energy cards. They're actually not efficient compared to what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of Attune with Ether floating around, and I am worried. That card was good when you played all of the energy cards, and I feel like maybe people are forgetting that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like the packages I've seen using Attune with Ether don't really go all that hard on it, and I'm worried about that.
So the thing I will note is that Rogue Refiner does crew Heart of Kirin, and it is good with Felidar Guardian. That said, I would still rather have some amount of Reflector Mages.
Okay.
It is nice to have Hub and a plethora of energy and not really have to worry about your mana, though. But Harness Lightning instead of just playing Wild Slash and playing Attune with Ether instead of Traverse, like these are not good sacrifices. You can figure out ways to make your mana better, up to and including doing what I saw 2 different Japanese players doing, which was just not playing red at all and casting Saheeli off of Gilded Goose, Oath of Nissa, and Interplanar Beacon.
Yeah, that's worth noting. Oath of Nissa deals with a lot of these Planeswalker mana issues you would otherwise have, and you're going to find that in such a high percentage of games. So maybe people are accounting a little bit too much for the red splash in their decks.
Yeah, I think Wild Slash is really good. Harness Lightning strikes me as pretty medium, but I do think that you want some sort of instant speed interaction, but I mean, maybe there's just a point where you say, screw it, I'm going to play Deck and Stone and that's it. Or you just do what you were talking about, play Walking Ballista, because that can also interrupt the combo. I don't think Walking Ballista is very good in this format, though. Like, the good cards are just automatically 2 toughness.
Okay. So you keep saying Wild Slash is very good, and I know what you mean. It's not a good Magic card, though. Like, it's basically Shock with a small amount of upside. And
no, it's Shock. It's Shock. Especially in, like, these Saheeli decks, it is Shock.
That is not a good Magic card. That's a contextually fine Magic card, and it's among the best options we have, especially in that color in this format. But let's be clear that if we can find replacements for it, we're pretty willing to.
Yes, absolutely. I say good in that, like, oh, I'm building my deck. What card do I want in this slot among the available legal cards? And it is Shock. And I am happy that I get to play Shock instead of not.
Understood.
But yeah, that's about it. Wild Slash maybe does some damage prevention-y things alongside Monastery Swiftspear, but it ain't happening here. So yeah, could be literal Shock, wouldn't make a difference. Anyway, if there is some instant speed interaction thing, I would also like it to be very cheap. Like, I do want to kill a prowess creature on turn 1, not on turn 2. I want to be able to interact with my opponent trying to Felidar Saheeli me for 1 mana. I mean, I don't think that there is a better option than Shock / Wild Slash.
Mostly agree.
But yeah, I do want to fix up the mana, and that might just be the best way to do it. So 7th place, another Phoenix deck. These decks are all somewhat close. I mean, you see different threats coming out of the sideboard and stuff. Maybe some different land counts, people playing Throw Possibility instead of Chart a Course. But realistically, they're all doing a lot of the same stuff.
I love how all of them know to play exactly 2 Merchant of the Veil. They have figured out the perfect number, and without question, it is 2.
Well, I guess this person's Sora doesn't have fiery temper, but I don't know.
They only have one lightning axe. That's why.
So I don't know that 2 is actually correct, but I've actually been pretty happy with that card.
Okay.
And then like Treasure Cruise in the mid game gives you a bunch of resources, so you get to make a bunch of land drops, and then casting Merchant in some grindy matchup like Sultai or Azorius or whatever, it's actually just good.
Yeah, I've seen it a bit even in Standard, and on the battlefield, it's a fine card. So I believe that.
Yeah, I used to just think that it was pretty crappy on both sides, and I'm warming up to both of them.
Okay.
And 8th place, another Phoenix deck. This one has 2 Thing in the Ice, 2 Jace Vryn's Prodigy. I do think that Jace is quite good in this deck.
Seems like it.
I don't know where it fits, though. I mean, if nothing else, think about Jace looting, and then you discard Fiery Temper.
Sounds good to me.
Also fills your graveyard for Treasure Cruise. But Phoenix in general is just erring a little bit more on the aggressive side of things, so it makes sense to have Thing in the Ice instead, but could be part of a good sideboard plan, but also runs afoul of a lot of graveyard hate. You know, people are bringing in Rest in Peace to try and beat your Phoenixes and Cruises. Well, Jace being a looter isn't the worst thing, but it's not a card that you necessarily want to side in against Rest in Peace, so maybe you're just better off doing something else. But I do think a couple copies main makes sense.
I feel you. So that's it. That's our first top 8 in a brand new format. Anything missing catching your eye? Anything like, say, Aetherworks Marvel?
Well, the top 8 is Phoenix, Copycat, Sultai, and then 1 mono blue. Marvel, I am less high on, although I did figure out actually a way how to build it. But I also want to note that if you read my article, like how I submitted it, like the words I sent in, and ignore the title, that is probably a good idea because I did not title it that. And if you read the title and then read the article, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'm going to give everyone listening to this podcast a little tip for engaging with StarCityGames.com. Always ignore the title. I've never written a title to one of my articles. They usually don't make any sense. Always ignore the title.
I typically title my own things. Occasionally, I just forget and I send it in blank or whatever, and they're just like, okay, I'm just going to make something up. But a lot of the time, I have like a very clear title labeled on it, and sometimes they change it and it makes me mad. And in this case, you know, my title was bland. It was just like the Aetherworks Marvel primer for Pioneer or whatever. And they changed it to just like Marvel's the best deck. And it's like
Marvel's broken. Get ready for bans.
Yeah, and it was like I at no point said that, but thanks. So yeah, then you bring it up now, and it's like, yeah, I was working on the deck and I was playing it, and I thought it was pretty good, but like at no point did I ever say like it's the best deck in the format, not close. I do think that it is. Like Emrakul is one of the cards that will likely get banned, and then, you know, maybe Marvel at some point, depending on how the first round of bans makes things shake out, right? Yeah, right now I think Marvel, kind of like it did in the past, is just getting held down by Copycat, and the Sultai lists are very well built. I do think that like 4-mana Artifact is good against Abrupt Decay and Vraska and stuff like that. So you do have that going for you. The thing that I didn't figure out until after I submitted the article was how exactly you're supposed to go about both beating aggro and hard casting Emrakul in games that go long, where like, you know, they disrupt you, kill your Marvel, you don't draw Marvel, whatever. And it's Castle Garenbrig.
Oh, okay.
So many games played out where I was like, God, I'm 1 mana short. Like, do I need to play like Nissa's Pilgrimage and stuff like that? And no, it's just play Garenbrig, man. Like,
that card's probably underrepresented in this format as it stands right now, right? Like that should do more things.
Oh yeah. So then that led me down the path of like, well, what if we caught all these crappy Marvels and just played like Temur Emerge? And I think that deck also has a lot of problems in the format. But as far as like casting turn 5 Emrakul with regularity, like that deck was doing it. And a lot of the time it was with like flashbacking Kozilek's Return and stuff. And Kozilek's Return is the other piece of the puzzle.
Interesting. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on those archetypes. Definitely something I enjoyed in the past. And that's a lot of what this format is, right? Like just reviving all these incredible decks that we really enjoyed playing previously.
Yeah, except now I get to cut crappy Servant of the Conduit for Jace and use Jace to loot away the K returns. And then you get to like flashback Attune with Ether to make your energy count high, hit your land drops, and either cast and resolve Marvel on 4 or cast Emrakul on turn 6 or whatever.
Sounds good to me.
So yeah, I made like a lot of big breakthroughs since that article, and I want to, publish some stuff. I think I was gonna put like a, I don't know, update in the beginning of this article. Just be like, yo, this is the addition to the primer that I think is necessary.
How about maybe a little YouTube deck tech action? Always could go there.
Yeah, I could do that. I just thought it made more sense for this because it's like a continuation of what I wrote last week, and I
Okay,
could certainly do both.
I like both.
Yeah, dude, I've been building decks nonstop. I don't know what your experience has been in Pioneer, but yeah, we might have our 3 best decks currently, but there's a lot of unexplored stuff out there. So what do you got for me? What's your coolest thing?
I have been so busy, and sadly, a lot of my time has been spent building Brawl decks. I spent a bunch of time traveling and covering Modern this weekend, so I was out for 4 days. I don't really have anything exciting for you right now, Jerry. I could make something up and say I figured this out, but that's not how we do things here. We own up to what we're working on a lot. Yeah. We own up to what we like, and I don't have any hard opinions on the format quite yet. I am excited for us to get to work playing some matchups against each other. And like I said, I would like to just start with this Sultai deck. It looks promising to me. I love the way it's constructed. It seems like the most reasonable answers with some great proactivity backing it up. You have turn 1 accelerant. This just checks all the boxes for me that I can totally believe this is the starting point for the format. And I'm willing to go there and maybe tune some of the things that deck doesn't have quite right yet. And I'm sure those will become clear to me as I get to play a ton of games here.
I fixed all the problems. Just go check the list on the website.
Okay, that sounds convenient. Saved me a lot of time. Devotion is another deck that I think is built wrong presently that I want to work on and get the payoffs right.
Yeah, me too. I'm very curious about that. A lot of people have been sending in deck lists. They all are wildly different. I mean, obviously they have 8 elves, Oath of Nissa to some degree, Leyline of Abundance, Nykthos, some Once Upon a Times. Most of them have Nissa, but like what payoffs people are using is totally up for grabs. I've talked to a few people, and they've said mostly that like the people who are playing Ulamog at least like it because it works well with Nissa, whereas playing things like Wake Root Elemental to go infinite requires a Nykthos.
Mm-hmm.
So Ulamog is, hey, if you have Nykthos, or even if you just have a bunch of mana dorks in a Leyline, or if you have a Nissa, there's just like a lot of different ways to actually cast that, and that usually translates into a kill.
That tracks. Ulamog is a difficult card to beat.
Yeah, it's true. I beat it a couple times when I was playing my Cauldron Familiar deck, though. So
yeah, don't do that anymore. Like, I understand I understand what you're trying to do, but that does not seem like the best use of your time.
I played one league over the course of like 3 days when I was busy. It was pretty fun.
Okay. As long as you're enjoying yourself, that's all we can really ask for.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to break it. I was like playing that while I was writing the Marvel article, so.
No, but that's the best sign for the format, like that you can do things like that and have it feel reasonable and enjoy yourself. Like, that's not super realistic in Modern.
Yeah.
And if this remains a space you can do that, that's really promising for the long-term health of this format.
No, I agree completely. I think that there are a lot of things in place for the format, and obviously that is going to change or whatever, most likely. But there are a lot of checks in place in the format that are very nice to have. And everything is like, pretty low-ish, flat-ish power level. And there are some games where you just get beat down by like a Lagana banned Trailblazer, and some games where you get Emrakul on, some games where you get copycatted, but like, I don't know, it all feels like the games are close and things are competitive.
That's all fine in moderation.
Yes.
If you're only doing that once in every 10 matches, that all sounds completely acceptable.
Right. And things like Oko are around, but whatever. Like, it's just another card in the format,
Yep.
We will talk more Pioneer. I will try and encourage you to get your brewing juices flowing because I want some input, man. I want to hear from you.
Oh, they will. Look, I just needed the time.
I know.
When there's travel on the horizon and you're trying to prep for that, it certainly eats into your schedule really hard. And like we've said, we have a billion balls up in the air right now, but the brews will happen. Rest assured.
All right. That is it for this episode. It is time for question of the week. Every week, we solicit people on our Discord for their burning questions, and we try and pick the best one, the most interesting one, maybe something that we have not actually discussed on the podcast that maybe relates to the thing that we were talking about. And we got some good ones, things that I didn't even think about. Otherwise, maybe we would have done like a video on this or something. But a question from Dylan that is, what would you like to see in the ban strategy in Pioneer? We never had an opportunity for a fresh format to discuss strategies such as that. They said they're open to doing off-cycle bans. And then also Travis Gibson said, if you were WotC, how would you handle the ban list for Pioneer and to a lesser extent right now Standard? I think these questions are pretty similar and in the same vein. And Travis Gibson, I will see you at SCGCon and I will hand you your arena deck list pin. As for Dylan, you will have to DM me your information. I will get that pin out for you. But Brian, what do you think that this entails? What do you think it changes? Like, I know they said that they were going to go off cycle. They're going to be more aggressive about it. Like, do we just live in waking fear of bans after every tournament, or what's the deal?
Look, I did not think I would be saying this when this format was announced. I wouldn't do anything right now. Like, this looks good. And I'm shocked by how good it actually looks. And the style of games that are being played, I think, are really interesting. There's a lot of really good diversity. Now, look, this is week one, and this can all change in a flash, and something can be discovered that is way better than everything else. And with SCGCon coming up, with the Invitational happening, there's now a huge incentive for that to happen. So I think we're going to check in after SCGCon, but for this first tournament, for these first results, I'm comfortable with this. And that is not at all what I expected to happen. I thought things were going to be way out of line, but this feels like a really promising format in its very nascent stages.
137 different archetypes on the first deck list dump.
That's wild. Absolutely wild.
Modern doesn't even hit that.
No, I believe that was the biggest deck list dump of all time.
It was.
Which is one of the reasons we're not doing a deck list dump for this particular episode.
And at Yoman_5 on the Twitter, Adam Hernandez, friend of the cast, basically did a Twitter feed like reaction to the deck dump, talking about the deck lists and things that he liked about them, things that he didn't like, etc. So if you are fiending for that kind of content, go find his thread on Twitter.
Absolutely.
And I think we retweeted his thread at Pioneer DLS. So
cool.
You can also just go find that. But yeah, like what do you think is going to happen after that? I mean, like, say people figure out that like Kethis is super busted for the Invitational, which not a lot of people seem to have been working on. And recently I've seen a few tweets where people are like, oh, I'm 9-1 with this deck. And it's just like a very rough version of Kethis.
So what is the first thing that I think is going to have to leave the format after people devote a lot of time to it? Maybe it's Emery. And I know that's weird given there's just no Emery here whatsoever.
Yeah, that is weird.
But that does feel like the most exploitable card to me, and the one that can push things afoul of the style of games that are being played presently.
One thing I will say from experimenting with various Emery decks is that there isn't a whole lot of juice for her to feed on. Like, there's no Mishra's Bauble, there's no engineered explosives. You have Mox Amber, there's like Terrarian, Springleaf Drum. You know, like, you get some stuff. For the most part, I've been using her as like a graveyard enabler when I was playing the Cauldron Familiar deck, and it was like she was getting back Smuggler's Copter and Witch's Ovens, and that's like the most impressive thing that I've seen so far. But
I was actually pretty sure your deck was supposed to be playing Golden Egg, but that's besides the point. And
God,
I know it's not a good Magic card, but it has cross synergies with your Cauldron Familiar.
Yeah,
Cauldron Familiar.
Sure.
And you get payoffs from Emery. So I think it would have been acceptable in your particular list. You also pad your life total a little bit, which is not the worst thing when you're trying to accomplish what you were doing.
It's just too mana intensive, and you end up just like looting away like your fourth land a lot of the time, and you're just hellbent. Obviously, you can change the deck to be a little bit different, but
right.
There could be decks with like Gate to the Afterlife Emery, or decks
Right.
that try and make a bunch of mana and do like Emery Ballista things. But realistically, think about what Emery is doing in the context of like Green Devotion or Copycat. It's just like, it just seems like a joke.
4 cards to your graveyard is also something worth tracking, and this will scale with every artifact ever made. So all that stuff comes to mind.
So,
but you're right. It doesn't look scary right now. And that speaks to my point that none of this really intimidates me. Oh, I guess I'm going to roll that back. If there's a card that is seemingly above and beyond everything else, it is either Saheeli or Felidar Guardian.
Yeah.
I think that's the cleanest thing to target.
I would like a Saheeli ban this time instead of Felidar Guardian. I think that
sure, to switch things up. I like that.
Well, the cat can see play in like decks that are fun and good, right? Like no one plays Saheeli for value.
It certainly won't, but I understand what you're saying. And
no, because then you just go back to playing Vannifar or whatever that is just fair, and you include a Felidar Guardian in that, and I think that's cool. But
maybe
Saheeli doesn't really show up in places without the cat.
Very true. Yeah, that is the most afoul card presently, and the one that is seemingly situated at the top of the metagame as it stands right now. As far as these like Sultai decks and targeting something from that, I wouldn't. The fact that these decks are hanging seems like a good thing to me.
Me too.
If you felt differently, then you could maybe make an argument for Jace Vryn's Prodigy, because I think that'll show up across the most decks. But I find that card interesting to play against. It doesn't have like those problematic play patterns to the same extent of something like Felidar Guardian.
No.
Or even Oko, I think.
It's just like you play Jace, your opponent sighs because they can't kill it, and then they play a thing, and then you're just like, all right, loot, transform it, kill that, tick it up, do something else, untap, like kill your 2 things. It's just like the game does end very quickly when Jace is involved. So it doesn't kill you outright or force you to keep up in mana like Felidar does, but I do think that it is problematic in its own right. But blue also doesn't have a lot of power outside of like Jace and the Delve cards.
Right.
So I don't know. I feel like Cruise and or Dig are more likely to go before Jace.
Than Jace. Okay. That's fine too. I mean, in the abstract, I think all of these cards' power level seems unacceptable. My point is just how things have played out thus far. It seems fine. And people really enjoy playing games of this format too. That's the biggest takeaway.
And so I think the big takeaway from like the ban strategy to me is that right now things look good. It is very clear what the best decks are, at least from the results of the Pioneer Challenge. So I would not expect any bans to happen yet. SCG Con could change things because it is a larger tournament.
MCQ this weekend too, actually on Friday. So just a couple days away.
Okay. Yeah, I want to play in that.
Yeah, I would like to play that as well.
Okay. We should talk about that then. And then after that, you'll be able to tell. Like there's going to be online discourse, if Felidar is like 6 of the top 8 or something, then it's just like, okay, yeah. I don't know when
Easy
this
target.
I don't know when this is happening, but like this is definitely going to happen. And a thing to note is that they said that they were going to take like an aggressive stance on the BNR list. I think that means like an aggressive stance in regards to unbans too. Like,
okay,
you could have a format and it's like, well, 3 of every top 8 has been comprised of Copycat, so we're going to take that off, and then the next few tournaments are just like, 6 of 8 Marvel, 6 of 8 Marvel, 6 of 8 Marvel. It's just like, oh, okay, let's unban Felidar. Like they might just do that instead of, banning Marvel and continuing to ban things from there.
Yep. I like that approach. And it also, if you're talking about like investments, it takes the sting off a little bit when people get their cards banned, if they can come back in the future.
Yeah.
And they don't just immediately devalue to nothing. Like certainly there'll still be impacts, but if you make this kind of rotating door policy and, say you print a card which has a meaningful impact on something like Felidar Guardian, which interacts with it in a favorable way and maybe even invalidates it to some extent. And then you can bring that card back to the table and see how it's impacted by this new print. That would be a really interesting way to go about the format as well.
We could use some good hate bears.
Sure. I'm down for that.
Can I just get a Pithing Needle Grizzly Bear? Is that too much?
Yeah, I'll give it to you. Why not? Enjoy.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I would also like some sort of combat ability, but I'm not going to be greedy about that.
Yeah, you asked for a grizzly bear, so that's what you're getting.
Yeah, not Revoker. Revoker does not count. Revoker stinks. 1 toughness is so bad. I want at least grizzly bear.
Just that one more point of toughness.
It matters, man. It matters a lot.
Sure.
Anyway, I think it will be very easy to see what is going to happen, which is cool. And you'll probably be able to tell. And if Twitter is yelling about it, it'll probably happen.
Well, look, there's upside and downside to that, but at least having some certainty and clarity and know that when a card gets a little out of line, the hammer's coming fast, that's worth a lot, as opposed to the present state of Standard where there's all these competing factors and they can't really take the action they would love to take because of the implications of it. With those shackles off when it comes to the Pioneer format, some clarity will be much appreciated.
Yeah, I wonder if they want to do anything like, just release some data or like kind of like a watch list or whatever, so people have some idea of what's happening. Because I think that's kind of the problem, right? Is like people are wondering if they're going to have to live in fear that their thing is just going to get banned out from under them. I don't think that's the case. I think it will be apparent based on results and what people are saying on social and stuff like that, whether or not any sort of action is coming, but being a little bit more transparent about it would be cool.
I like the watch list idea.
Yeah, I mean, there were problems with it before, right? Where it's like anything on the watch list is basically saying like, don't ban or don't buy into this card.
Okay, that's fine. Why is that a bad thing?
Because it's like a soft ban. And
I get it.
So you're saying like, okay, Feladar's on the watch list, and then people are like, okay, I guess I'm selling all my Saheelis, and then the next 5 tournaments, like Feladar does poorly because no one's playing it because they all sold them all. It like doesn't actually, it just like influences the format in a bad way, right? Like in kind of like a cheaty way.
I think there'll always be a group of people who will play the best deck regardless of that fear.
I agree with you. And maybe if the same person is the only person playing the deck and they, say they're Matnass or whatever, then it's like, wait a second, there's something going on here, But if that person doesn't continually do well or they top 8 every other tournament, like people are going to be like, oh, this format's good. But it just means that people will never pick up the cards that go in that deck.
Maybe there's a better way to do it that we're not thinking of yet. Provisional bans, a timeout. I like those approaches a lot. Sure. Something new. We can do something new. Don't be afraid to try something new with this format.
Yeah, we can definitely do something new.
It doesn't go back.
We can definitely do something new. I don't know if like a timeout actually does it for you. Like you would have to get meaningful data from it. Like you could try, all right, Magic Online, Feladar Guardian is banned from 2 weeks. We want to see what the format looks like with it gone for those 2 weeks. And we're going to be looking at this data very hard. I could see that being a thing. But if you're just like, oh, I'm just going to ban it for 3 months just cause, and then I'll unban it. It's like, well, that's not helpful. You're not doing anything with that data,
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could see how that would have been beneficial in the current Standard situation, right? Like 2 weeks of testing a Field of the Dead ban before any of this happened would have pointed very clearly to the fact that this was going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
And saved us a lot of headaches.
Yep. No, I agree with you, but you need everyone participating as they normally would, not people knowing that they're in a science experiment,
Sure. Yep.
Because what if there are people that have twisted priorities where it's like, well, I'm playing on ladder, but it's not real because field isn't banned for my PTQ. So I'm not going to try and win because there's no point to it. So I'm not going to buy into these OCOs, which I think are obviously the best thing. And then it's like the data gets skewed.
Right. Of course. Always a concern.
So it is tough. I feel like they're going to be able to figure out something, and hopefully they do some cool stuff with it because I think this presents them a unique opportunity. But it's also possible that they just don't do anything with it. And then, maybe it does take like 2 or 3 tournaments in a row for, 6 of 8 Feladar to get any traction on the card, but I doubt it. I feel like they're just going to be monitoring Magic Online data more heavily than anything else, like, some random opens or invitational or whatever.
Yeah, huge source of data, especially with the participation rates at this point. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of actionable things pulled from that.
Yep. And I know that they're already looking at it too. And I don't know what the results are or anything, but it's like, oh yeah, we have a lot of data, and we are monitoring things. So
good. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That's game.